As a bit of a background from myself, I'm a Lancastrian born and bred, like many people in the constituency. So I grew up in Pendle um, from a single parent family after the early death of my father. Went to state school, college, and then was the first in my family to go to university. Also got involved in politics when I decided to take politics A level back at the age of 16, not because of any real interest, but because my friend took the A level as well and we thought it would be fun. From that, I developed a passion then, which has kind of stuck with me ever since, and that's what, 19 years now. So I've been quite involved since then. In regards to my day-to-day trade, if you will, I'm an insurance broker by trade. So typically I'm already hated, which is always a good start. But I've been involved in the party now, certainly for the majority of that 19 years. I've been a councillor for the last 6.5 years, where I'm in charge of scrutinising education policy in Lancashire, but I'm also the leader of the Conservative group in Pendle. So I certainly have a experience in politics from a party level, but also from a council level, which hopefully I can bring to the fore in both the campaign and, if lucky, to be elected, to hit the ground running. Well, like I said, I took it for A level, and to be honest, it was just about being able to spend more time with my friend, and it was literally that very first lecture when I went in and we were talking about political ideology, and I realised actually I am a conservative. How I was brought up was on meritocracy. If you work hard, you are rewarded for that work. And since then, I've never really looked back. And I think when we look back at history and we see that actually we should be rewarding hardworking families, that to me is one of the most pivotal kind of aspects for my politics. That, and obviously, like I said, with having lost my father at a young age, that to me has also been a driving force in my day-to-day politics. He was a public sector worker, being a college lecturer, but I always think, well, what would make him proud? And if I have to think that actually he wouldn't be proud of either a policy or an argument I'm making, then I don't do it. So I think certainly from that education from a young age and kind of my own inward conversations with my father, that to me is my driving force and what's getting me involved, essentially, to try, and it's cliche, and as much as I hate cliches, to make the country a better place for everyone. I decided, obviously with the internal workings of the party, the seat was advertised back in March of this year, so just before the local elections, and it was at that point I decided to run for the seat. Obviously went through the internal mechanism, and yeah, I was very lucky to be selected, and since then haven't looked back and have spent pretty much every day since my selection at the end of July campaigning to help improve the lives of the residents of Bury South and obviously Redcliffe, Whitefield, Unsworth, and Prestwich. Obviously, the general election campaign came a lot quicker than we were anticipating, so I was hoping for a 2.5 year long campaign and instead have a 4 month campaign, which has taken us quite by surprise. But it's not exactly conducive to family life either. So at the moment, I'm seeing my young daughter when I take her to nursery in the morning, and then I'm not seeing her again until I take her to nursery the next morning. So I guess either way, I'm kind of looking forward to the actual campaign coming to an end, despite it actually being really fun, just so I can spend more time with my daughter. But no, it's been a fun 3 months so far, and hopefully the next 19 days is just as much fun, if not more so. Okay, in regards to my priorities, and it's obviously been delivered to the majority of the constituency already now, a 6-point plan, if you will. So part of that is opposing the GMSF, so the Greater Manchester Spatial Framework, which is basically proposing concreting over huge parts of our greenbelt to the tune of thousands of homes, which I disagree with on a planning matter, because I think we should be adopting a brownfield site first policy, but also when we're declaring a climate emergency, that needs to run through every single government policy, and it cannot be beneficial for the environment or the climate if we're concreting over green fields and green belt for housing. So I think part of that is getting that policy change centrally, and hopefully that will then water down the GMSF. Obviously, there is a concern of crime and antisocial behaviour. So we've already seen the announcement of Boris Johnson's recruitment drive for 20,000 new police officers. So we already know for next year there will be 347 coming to Greater Manchester. So it's about putting forward our case so that Bury South can get its fair share, but that they are also deployed where they are most needed and where is that greatest concern of antisocial behaviour and low-level crime. Because obviously if we tackle those issues, that hopefully prevents the ongoing cycle and escalation to more serious crime. As I said earlier, I'm the chairman of Education Scrutiny in Lancashire. So education, especially with a young daughter, is something I'm extremely passionate about. So obviously the increased funding for education I am delighted to hear about. One thing I want to see more of is focusing on early years education, because I think if you get it right at the beginning, that flows through into the rest of the child's education career. But ultimately, we also need to see a new high school for Redcliffe. We've been talking about it for many years, and we are now arguably closer than we ever have been before. So in my own conversations with the Secretary of State, he's aware of the policy, he's sounding very supportive. So it does sound like we are a stone's throw away from actually getting the school that the town needs. I'm then looking at the regeneration of our high streets. So we've recently seen the Labour Council spending 2.2 million in regenerating Prestwich. And actually we've seen Prestwich go backwards in terms of congestion and people almost avoiding it because of the congestion. So we need to have a look at a new plan for Prestwich and what we can do to actually bring more people in and tackle those congestion issues on the Bury New Road. And when we look at Redcliffe again as a town centre, we see far too many empty shops. And then when we look at the shops that are occupied, a lot are charity shops. So it's about speaking to businesses and shoppers to see what they want in their high street and finding a path to actually delivering that. Because ultimately, if we have a town that's dying, that soon peters out to the rest of the town and people take less pride in their own street, and we end up with a ghost town. And that's the last thing we want. We've seen the great regeneration of the market. It's what we can do to spread that out through the rest of the town centre. And then it's creating more jobs, more good quality and high paying jobs for the rest of the constituency. So ideally we want to create a business hub where we can promote new employers coming to the area, and whether that's through business rates initiatives or the use of enterprise zones, etc. By bringing more jobs into the area, we can then bring the workers into the area, which will hopefully add to that regeneration of the high streets as well. So they're probably the key priorities that we're looking to, obviously without mentioning getting Brexit done, so we can actually focus on delivering those. Oh, I think first of all, if they're liking the ideas, that's part of the argument already won. But when you look at the way parliaments or councils or indeed the party systems work, you can only really deliver those ideas if you're part of a party that's in government. So obviously if you elect a Labour politician but we've got a Conservative government, then they are more than likely going to be opposing a lot of plans that you've already agreed to. Likewise for any other smaller parties or independents, unless we're at the point where every single vote counts and there's a bit more sway than normal, really the only way to deliver these policies, and that's changing to planning laws and regeneration of high streets, etc., the only way to deliver those is by voting Conservative. And I know, similar to you, there are many lifelong Labour voters out there who are sick of the whole Brexit delay and want it delivered. And there is only one party that is actually able to deliver Brexit, which is Boris and his deal. And then we also have the ongoing issues of leadership. So I completely sympathise with any lifelong Labour supporter who's sat on the fence and not knowing where to go. And I think the only sensible and credible alternative is by voting Conservative at this election. Interesting question. Well, I've actually signed up to the Stand Up for Brexit pledge, which basically says I will be backing Boris's deal if that deal has not got through Parliament so that we leave by the 31st of January. The pledge also states that I, at that point, would then back a no-deal Brexit. So I think ultimately, when we look at the deal and some of the questions that have been raised around it, it does end the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice, and that has been acknowledged by Martin Howe QC. It does end the common fisheries policy. It does end the common agricultural policy. It ends freedom of movement. Basically, all these things, if someone came to you 4 years ago and said, would you take this as a Brexit? Yes, you would. So the only difference between then and now is we've had a sniff of no deal. So I think ultimately the only realistic Brexit left on the table is the deal we have. So I would be supporting that. I think ultimately there is no middle ground, and we saw that with the European elections, with the two parties that were wanting to find a middle ground were really damaged, and the two parties that wanted to go on one side or the other, and very firmly so, really benefit. So I think that was the death of any real compromise. So where we are now is, we have no Brexit, no deal, or a deal. So we do have the deal on the table, which to me is the compromise. We've had the likes of the ERG, who I agree with, it's not a perfect deal, but it is probably the best deal that's going to be on the table. So if we're not happy with that, we then either have no Brexit or no deal. So no deal won't be delivered, and no Brexit is quite clearly an affront to democracy. I think for any of those who were ardent Remainers, and I would count my wife as one of those, I think ultimately they too have got to a point where frustration is probably the key word coming out, where we've seen the 3 years of debate, and actually what's it achieved other than we need more hours to debate Brexit, when it's been one of the things we've talked about most over that last 3 years. So I think we do just need to get it delivered, move on, and then focus on the key priorities of the nation. And I genuinely do think the only way to do that is by backing the deal on the table. That's the only way to take no deal off the table for anyone concerned about that no deal input. I think for everyone else who's seen things, it's the uncertainty of Brexit that's been more crippling than any decision we could make. The amount of businesses who've held back on large recruitment drives or investment or research and development because of Brexit, they want it done regardless as to how we leave, just so they can start investing. And ultimately, that could be the impetus we need in the economy to ultimately combat any impact there could well be. So I think we do just need to move forward, and hopefully by the end of January that is sorted and we can move on as a nation. Wow, it's a difficult one because there are so many different things that could be spent on. So obviously I've touched on further police, regeneration of our towns and our education. Now, some of those are policy related, so don't necessarily need the funding. So for example, with GMSF probably doesn't need the funding, it needs the political will. So that could potentially be delivered quite cheaply. For me, I would say a new high school for Redcliffe. Like I said, it's been far too long in the making. We are that stone throw away from it, so we are that near to delivering it. So we absolutely need to deliver that for the town. And any remaining money for me would go towards the regeneration of our high streets. So to ultimately free the flow of traffic and increase parking spaces, for example, in Prestwich. But then what can we do to promote more businesses coming into Ratcliffe? So obviously we've seen a lot of expenditure on new benches and flags. It's just unfortunately there's no one to sit on them at the moment. So what can we do to bring those businesses back? And if that is by creating more business rates relief or actual expenditure and plans to actually regenerate the entire town centre, that to me is where the money needs to be spent, because if you tackle one of those issues, the knock-on effect it has with the other policies is more beneficial. So if you tackle the high streets, then actually more people are in employment, so crime could potentially be less. If there's more people in jobs, there's the jobs for people once they've left education to go into. So there is that knock-on effect by having the schools and the town centres and businesses all lined up that ultimately will, in my view, make Bury South a much better place to live than it already is. And it already is a very good place to live. Well, I think ultimately a lot comes down to common sense, and whether we like it or not, common sense has been missing from politics for quite a while, and we've seen the lack of trust in politicians going back 10 years to the expenses scandal, and that's been eroded even further with the Brexit debate. I think what I would hopefully be able to bring to the table is the fact that I am a normal guy. Like I said, I was brought up in a single parent household, went to a state school. I've basically got to the point where I am because of my own hard work. And that hard work is what ultimately should be rewarded. So I completely understand the concerns, but I'm similar to you. I know what it's like to face hard times when I've been made redundant at the height of a recession. I know what it's like to try and find a job in a overcrowded market because a lot of people have been made redundant. So I know how difficult things can be. And that message is one that I consider a life lesson that I will never forget. So in regards to taking it too far, I understand that concern, and I can assure you that I won't take things too far. I think if I've said what my pledges are, yes, I agree we can always promise and over-deliver, but if we try to take something too far just to show that we've not won the match 2-0 but 5-6, 7-0, that's when we need to think, well, actually, is that the priority? Can we not re-divert some of that effort into other locations? So I think really it's just common sense, and that to me is something that I am bringing to my campaign, but it's what I would also bring to my life, hopefully, as your MP in a few weeks' time. Obviously, it's a difficult one being in the world of hypotheticals, but for me, I can only hear the views of the public and the residents of the towns of Radcliffe and Ainsworth and Unsworth and Whitefield and Prestwich by speaking to people. So it's by going out and speaking to residents and holding regular advice surgeries, which would be my plan to do so on a weekly basis. So it's by hearing those views that I can actually make a truly informed decision. And yes, there will be times where I probably have more information than a general member of the public, but it's by putting forward those arguments. If, for example, the argument came through, you can have your new school in Radcliffe, but we want to build a bypass right through the middle of one of the towns, then that to me would be a red line. Yes, we ultimately want to deliver the policies that I'm setting out on a more local level, but we also need to be sensible about it. And it goes back to that common sense approach. There's no point giving with one hand and taking away with the other. So it's about having a fully informed discussion, both with the residents of a constituency, but ultimately with the party hierarchy as well, where hopefully those arguments can be put forward and a sensible compromise sought. I've already spoken about my 6-point plan. So for me, my success would be delivering that plan. That to me is the contract and the pledge I'm making with the people of Bury South. So ultimately, I would hope I can turn back in 10 years' time and say, well, I've had your new high school in Radcliffe, I've regenerated your high streets, we've had more police, so crime is down. That to me is the level of success. It's no good just saying, well, we've achieved Brexit and everything else has gone to pot. So that to me is my contract for people to coin the phrase said recently. But ultimately, the failure would be to turn around and realise that in 10 years, I've achieved nothing. So again, it is through speaking to residents and representing you on a daily basis to improve the life of every single constituent that I can speak to, hear from, and help. So yes, there's the policy level, but it's about improving the lives of every member of the public, really. So that to me is my benchmark for success. Yeah, well, I think obviously after seeing the last two leadership debates, I think part of the issue, and hopefully most people will agree, has been the audience. Certainly last night, there was a much tougher atmosphere for the likes of Boris than there was for the leader of the opposition. But when you're also being held to account for things that you've actually not done, Boris has only been the Prime Minister for 100 days, but he's being judged on 9 years of policies when actually for an MP, he wasn't even there for 5 years of that because he was Mayor of London. So I think trying to hold him to this benchmark for something that he had no control over, and I see it on the doorstep myself where it's occasionally my fault for government policies over the last 9 years when I've not even been a member of parliament, let alone had any say over anything. So I think ultimately people have already made their mind up whether they like Boris, Corbyn, or any of the other leaders. So it's very difficult to change that opinion. What I can do is change their opinion of me. So it's about, again, having those conversations, and there will be disagreement. And where there is disagreement, I hope it to be friendly and courteous, and at the end of it, I will shake your hand and wish you a pleasant day, because that is my approach. I don't go into the negative campaigning. I want to talk up my campaign and not rubbish other people's. So I've had my own track record previously, which I'm more than happy and proud to talk about. But ultimately, we have a positive message, and I think it's difficult to say you're lying about your message when you've not even had a chance to deliver it. So I think the only way to turn around and say whether or not something is truthful is by voting for me on the 12th of December and then judging me at the next election as to whether I've achieved those promises that I'm making with you. That to me is the only sensible way of doing anything. For anyone else who says they can't trust anything, part of that is party political related. If you're a member of the Labour Party, you're never going to trust the Prime Minister of the Conservatives and vice versa. So for me, I'm more than happy to speak to anyone. You can contact me with my usual Facebook and Twitter pages, and if that means sitting in a pub over a friendly pint and having a friendly discourse, more than happy to do so. Although you'll have to buy your own pint before the election because of strict electoral rules. In regards to the last point, I think when you do have a temporary building, just keep on adding to it to try to improve is probably throwing good money after bad money. What you need is a fit for purpose new leisure centre, which is energy efficient. And obviously we look at swimming pools and they are arguably one of the biggest drains on energy on keeping it heated. What we have seen and has been debated as part of the programme of the new high school for Radcliffe is actually having those leisure facilities joined up with the high school, which creates that much stronger argument because one, it's a fit for purpose brand new building for education, but providing any safeguarding issues can be addressed regarding swimming pools and everything else. I think ultimately there is a very strong argument for delivering both on the same site, and if anything, the leisure centre could actually help fund the school as well. So I think that side is certainly helpful. In regards to how important or how high up on my priorities Radcliffe is, obviously I've spoken about my 6-point plan, and when you think about it, nearly every single point involves Radcliffe. So when I've been out speaking to businesses, they are concerned about crime. we tackle that by having more police on the street. And there's the new high school, which I've just spoken about. There's regeneration of the high street, the protection of our green belt. All of these are Radcliffe centric. So to me, Radcliffe is arguably one of my main priorities regarding both funding and policy related.